great pleasure for me to be here again with you guys. So I will just start with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks that you have given us a fountain of mercy in the blood and water that poured forth from your Son's pierced side on the cross. And we thank you that you have given us so many holy witnesses who continue to perpetuate and live that mercy through the life of grace that you give them. And we ask that you bless us particularly this morning as we meditate on those great mysteries, those holy women of mercy. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Right. So, of course, very prominently, last Sunday, Mother Teresa became the Church's newest officially canonized saint. A time of great rejoicing for many people in the whole world, but not for everyone in the whole world. So there are a couple of people who are very prominent anti-Mother Teresa people for many years. And one of them, a man named Arup Chatterjee, who's an atheist Indian doctor who's from Calcutta, lived in Calcutta with Mother Teresa, has written a couple of books against Mother Teresa. And the most recent one was just published a couple of days before her canonization, called Mother Teresa, The Untold Story. And in it, he lays out charges against Mother Teresa. He says, for instance, he gives us a series of disastrous floods in the area around Calcutta. And he tells this moving story that the prostitutes of Calcutta got together and pooled their money to donate to the aid workers to help out the cause for alleviating the crisis of the flood. Where was Mother Teresa? Nowhere. That there was a factory full of child workers not too far from Calcutta that had a terrible disaster and it blew up, actually, and many of the children were killed. It describes all of these efforts of international aid companies to come and to help and to assist. And where was Mother Teresa? She wasn't there. And he tells this example of another story. In December this is a quote from the book. He says, in December 1984, 3,500 people died in Bhopal where toxic gas was accidentally leaked by the Union Carbide factory. It remains the world's worst industrial accident whose health repercussions continue to this day. Mother Teresa, whose post-Nobel Peace Prize reputation within India was then very high indeed, rushed into Bhopal like an international dignitary. Her contribution to the Bhopal disaster has become legendary. She looked at the carnage, nodded gravely, and said, "I say, forgive." There was a stunned silence in the audience. She took in the incredulity of the audience and nodded again and repeated, "I say, forgive," and left. This is actually the pièce de la résistance of his case against Mother Teresa. She didn't want to help. She didn't want to give aid. She didn't want to give funds. This is a woman of no mercy. This is a woman who is not a saint. Now, this brings us to the heart of what mercy actually is. What we're actually talking about when we're looking at sanctity, when we're looking for what an example of a woman whose life has been transformed by mercy to pour it out for other people, having received it herself. Looked at from a certain angle, Chatterjee's criticisms make a certain amount of sense. If Mother Teresa were, in fact, the prime minister of a country and she was acting like this, you would say this is callous, this is irreverent, in the face of human disaster. But that's not who she was. She was the Mother Superior of a religious organization. She was trying to be a saint. This gets us to the heart of it. Mother Teresa is not a saint because she worked with the poor. She's not.
What?
She's not a saint because she raised global consciousness of the plight of slum dwellers. That's not why, even though she did. She's not a saint because she was a great humanitarian, even though she was. Mother Teresa is a saint because she gave her life over to the mercy of Jesus. And having been herself transformed by the mercy of Jesus, she became a living icon of the mercy of Jesus to all those whom she met. So we're going to be exploring a little bit about what that looks like. I have to let Anne-Marie know that I didn't tell her this, but this is not actually going to be a talk about great women in the plural who showed mercy. It was going to be, and then I decided, you know what, this is really just going to be about Mother Teresa, because, why not? So this is really about Mother Teresa. Don't be looking for, what about the other women? They're not there. I was going to talk about, Catherine of Siena because she's a boss, and I was going to talk about, Elizabeth of the Trinity because mega boss. And again, I was just, no, you want, we're just going to talk about Mother Teresa. So that's where we are, right? Mother Teresa. Accept that. All right. So this is what we're talking about. That this is the essence of sanctity. This is the essence of a woman transformed by mercy, and this is what we want to emulate. So I'm going to look into this angle on Mother Teresa's sanctity and her life of mercy by trying to understand a little bit more about three different groups that she showed mercy to. The poor, her sisters and her co-workers, and the world in general. Okay, so first, talk about Mother Teresa and the mercy for the poor. So perhaps Mother Teresa's biggest, most famous enemy was Christopher Hitchens, famous atheist evangelist who died a few years ago. And he said in his big piece against her that her intention was not to help people. That's what he said. He was so frustrated that people couldn't see this. Her intention was not to help people. That's a direct quote. And then also that she would lie to donors about the uses of their contributions. He says, quote, "It was by talking to her," he talked to her, it was really amazing, it was by talking to her that I discovered, and she assured me, that she wasn't working to alleviate poverty. She was working to expand the number of Catholics. She said, "I'm not a social worker. I don't do it for this reason. I do it for Christ. I do it for the church." This is fascinating. This is Christopher Hitchens' perfectly insightful, actually completely accurate understanding of who Mother Teresa was. And he sees and is horrified that here she's supposedly giving her whole life to the poor, and she's not actually trying to cure poverty. That's not what she's doing. It's a shock. So you think, well, obviously, this is the whole thing. She gave her whole life. She would take people off the street when they would give them a place to die in dignity, care for them, get them better, all that kind of stuff. Mother Teresa did not extend mercy to the poor by campaigns to end social poverty. She did not extend mercy to the poor by trying to eliminate at a cultural level the material and social conditions that create poverty. She did not do these things. Mother Teresa extended mercy to the poor by meeting a poor man, meeting a poor woman, taking her off the street with her hands, with her sisters, with her co-workers, bathing her wounds, giving him treatment, helping to be a presence of Jesus Christ for this person, for that person. That's the heart. Because mercy does not take place at the level of society. Mercy does not take place at the level of policy changes. Mercy does not take place at the level of social abstractions, even very important ones, like government, laws, all of these things. These are not instruments of mercy. Mercy takes place from a person to a person. It's personal, not social. It's personal. It's either happening in me, to me, and through me, or it's not. That's that. So it's not surprising that Mother Teresa would say very striking things. She would say that she would sooner shut down all of her houses, all of her convents in the whole world, rather than become a social work organization. Because she saw that the world was full of many beautiful social work organizations, many beautiful governmental and non-governmental organizations working to do those larger things that are appropriate at that level to alleviate the material, social, and physical conditions that create deleterious situations of poverty. But she saw that her vocation was not to social work in itself, but, as she would put it, to meet Christ in the distressing disguise of the poorest of the poor. That's what an organization, an agency, a government, even social workers in a certain sense, are not structurally set out to do. They're not set out to meet Christ in distressing disguise. Because only a person can be distressed. Only a person can be led past a disguise into the heart. So mercy comes through this face-to-face encounter, seeing in the other not a problem for which I have a solution, not a problem that can be used to leverage social change, but seeing a person, encountering a person, meeting Christ there. Note one thing about the direction here. This is the motive power. This is the source of grace for how Mother Teresa poured out, became an instrument of God's mercy for the poor. But notice how she says this. She doesn't say that my goal is to, in this moment, be Christ for this man, for this woman on the street. She says, my goal, my vocation, is to meet Christ in the distressing disguise of the poorest of the poor. She sets out to meet him, to be transformed. And with that humility, that openness to see another person, she is able to be an instrument of mercy. This is actually why, by misunderstanding this, is actually where objections to both Mother Teresa and charity in general come from. Because if you don't see that, if you don't have that in your heart, this is what I'm doing. I am actually going to meet Christ and to be changed by him. If that's not in my heart, in my mind, my desire for going out to do works of mercy, to do works of charity, it turns into condescension. And there's nothing you can do to get away from it. Because it says, I have this good thing, you don't have this good thing. I have another good thing, which is a desire to give you my good thing. I have two good things and you have no good thing. Great, we can share. And now I have three good things because I shared. You know? There's no getting around it. This is the whole crisis of charity. You know, this is the whole crisis. This is why even any number of really wonderful food stamps programs and that kind of stuff will not solve poverty in Cincinnati, in America, in the world, etc. Because it turns people off to say that. But it does not turn people off when we are come together to meet Christ and to meet him together, simply put. That's the engine of mercy. That's the engine. That's the power source. That's how Mother Teresa worked to bring mercy to the poor, was to receive herself mercy, transformed by the poor, transformed by the Jesus Christ that she met there. So remember that there is, actually just think for a second, is working to cure poverty a work of mercy? This is very sneaky, because one can approach it in two ways, but basically no. Now, the popes will talk about this is good. We need to be working to, again, doing everything that we can to mitigate and alleviate the circumstances of the cultural vices and wickedness and selfishness that creates the material and social conditions of poverty. We need to be doing that we can to help alleviate those problems. We can never just abandon people and say, like, well, God said we'll always have the poor with us, so like whatever, don't worry about it. Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. We have a heart to change, right? But again, what are the corporal works of mercy? Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, this naked person, this hungry person, visit this person in prison. You can't visit humanity in prison. You have to visit a person, right? Those are the works of mercy. Encounters with real people. So there can be a bit of a temptation, especially in the era of like Facebook activism, to either despair, just like, well, whatever, I can't change anything, so, fine. I'm just gonna like donate 30 cents when I buy my next like pumpkin spice latte or whatever, or to a false kind of super activism, like we got to solve this problem, we're just going to solve it, we're going to take care of it, it's going to be done, we are going to end world hunger by 2050. Forget it. That's not the first action of a Christian. It's not the first action of a Christian. Some people, it's very important that we want to emphasize this, some people do actually have a vocation within their vocation, whatever it may be, to large-scale social work, large-scale social action. Politicians, people who can really have this kind of personality, they can organize people, they can get referenda signed, they can really work in their local community and wider communities to make like some of the beautiful structural changes that need to be made. That's a beautiful thing. I would never in any way criticize that. If someone has that, it's a gift to pursue, and that's a holy thing that can be an act of the love of God. But that's not the only way, and it's not even in itself necessarily the best way to respond to Christ in the distressing disguise of the poor. The first thing that I do, that we do, is to actually learn to see Christ, to meet him, to respond to him. Respond to that call to mercy that first we receive and then through us is given to others. So, what about the mercy that Mother Teresa would show for her sisters and for those who would work with her? I think it's really interesting. She says in that beautiful kind of book of letters and stuff that came out in 2007 called Come Be My Light, she says in one of her letters, my love for Jesus keeps growing more simple and more, I think, personal. Like our poor, I try to accept my poverty of being small, helpless, incapable of great love. But I want to love Jesus with Mary's love. I really love that because here we're getting from the inside the real heart of her vocation. This is what enables her to meet Christ in this distressing disguise, is that she recognizes that fundamentally she is the poor one. She is the poor one who needs to be poor with Christ, to have Christ transforming her poverty of soul, her poverty of love, her poverty of unhumility, the poverty that is pride. And that needs to be transformed by the grace of Jesus Christ. And that's, of course, everything that the missionaries of charity set out to do. That's why, again, it's not just a group of people who kind of work together for a wider enterprise. That's why it's a religious congregation. That's why they consecrate their lives not directly to service of the poor, but directly to God, and in the shape of serving the poor, because it's directly to God. So that's this gift. This is the way that in itself, this religious group is an instrument of mercy, first and foremost, for those who are in it. And because it's an instrument of mercy for those who are in it, it's also an instrument of mercy for those who encounter them. That's the pattern. To be transformed, to be able to hand out to others. To be changed myself, to be able to give to others. It's always how it is. She says, again in the letter, she says, suffering, pain, failure is but a kiss of Jesus. A sign that you have come so close to Jesus on the cross that he can kiss you. So my child, be happy. Do not be discouraged. Smile back. For you, it is a most beautiful chance of becoming fully and totally all for Jesus. One of the astonishing insights of the Holy Spirit that Mother Teresa had was to see the powerhouse of grace in suffering. Now this is, again, Hitchens and Chatterjee and some of these really deeply misunderstand Mother Teresa's comments about suffering. Suffering is evil. Let's just make that totally clear. Suffering is evil. It's bad. It's not supposed to be in the world. It's not what we were made for. It's an effect of sin. It's evil, simply put. So is the cross. And that's the source of our salvation. It's our redemption. So, when we encounter these things, when we find ourselves suffering, Mother Teresa realized very deeply that this is a moment for us when we can be, like no other moment, united with Jesus Christ on the cross. And it can be a powerhouse of grace if lived with love, if undertaken with love. Not to put suffering on myself, but when I find myself with suffering, to freely choose it, even though I didn't want it, and I would happily get rid of it if I could, and you should, that's good. But when I can't get rid of it, and it's just here to stay for a little while, I accept this. I accept this in love, and I give it to Jesus Christ on the cross for myself, for another, for healing, for change, for whatever, She had this tremendous insight about the powerhouse of suffering, so much so that she formed this group called the Sick and Suffering Co-workers of the Missionaries of Charity. It's very easy to become a sick and suffering co-worker of the Missionaries of Charity. It means that you are very sick and you have lots of suffering, and you write to somebody in the Missionaries of Charity and say, I am very sick, I have lots of suffering, I would like to be in a spiritual relationship with one of your sisters. And they say, good. And then you have a sick and suffering pen pal relationship. My sister was tremendously ill for a very, very long time, and she was a sick and suffering co-worker of the Missionaries of Charity for years and years. Because this is Mother Teresa's understanding, that mercy is so powerful that there's absolutely nothing about the human experience that we should waste. Nothing. It's a really unflattering comparison. I'm going to make it anyway. It's a bit like people in starvation era on farms. I'm not going to waste the tail and the hoofs and the snout of this pig, right? I'm gonna pickle the hooves, I'm gonna turn the rest into distressing kinds of sausages, and it's gonna be great, this is gonna be great. And then sometimes what seems like it should be the most discarded, the most nasty thing turns into the most delicious thing, which is blood sausage. But that's another story entirely. But this is my point. Mother Teresa realized that you can't there are no dog ends and bits. Nasty bits of life that you just have to leave on the cutting room floor and abandon entirely. And she structured the entire religious life that she created so that the lay people of whom she knew and her religious sisters could take all the dog ends of life, everything, including its suffering and its unattractiveness, and offer that in love to Jesus Christ as a powerhouse of grace. This, by the way, is particularly beautiful because it gives, when we realize this, we realize that every person and especially the poor and the uneducated and those without resources, have privileged avenues to encounter Jesus Christ. Now again, I want to be really clear. We're not saying that poverty is good. We're not saying that suffering is good. We're not saying that we should just leave these people in their conditions so that they can be a powerhouse of grace for the rest of us, living in nicely AC'd homes with a 4-car garage. No. But that each of us is called to consecrate the suffering that is ours for our own salvation and the salvation of others, in working for mercy and working for healing for the specific people that we know. All right. So lastly, just in a couple of minutes, I want to talk a little bit about how she was an instrument of mercy for the world at large. Now this is tough because the world at large is an abstraction. It doesn't really exist. It's just a bunch of people, right? It's just a bunch of people. But how does this work? I think the most helpful lens to look at this is from this document written by Paul VI about evangelization. That has a very unappetizing Latin title of Evangelii Nunciandi, where he says, modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than teachers. And people usually like to stop the quotation there. To say well, I don't have to talk about God. I could just be a witness, whatever. Because they don't want to listen to teachers. They just want to listen to witnesses. But the sentence keeps going. And you got to finish the end of the sentence to really understand what's going on here. He says, modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it's because they are witnesses. It goes both ways. Mother Teresa knew this. She says in a prayer, at the conclusion of a prayer that she wrote for the missionaries of charity that she gave to them as a spiritual legacy, she says at the end of it, let me preach you, God, without preaching, not by words, but by example, by the catching force, the sympathetic influence of what I do, the evident fullness of the love my heart bears for you. What's going on here? She's asking Jesus Christ to be so transformed in everything that she is by his love and his mercy that it spills out, communicates to others in everything that she does, whether she's actually able to use words at that moment or not. And notice what the consequence of that is. That here's a woman who prays, let me preach you without preaching, not by words, but by example, who often preaches by carrying the dead, bringing people in from the streets, giving them cigarettes in one really hilarious example, and all this kind of stuff, who is then given the Nobel Peace Prize and gives in front of the eyes of the entire world a speech at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony about abortion, where she goes on and on and on and on about how there is no peace in a society that embraces abortion. So this is a woman who says, let me preach you without preaching, not by words, not by words. And then she talks to the whole world for half an hour about abortion. And nobody has ever forgiven her for that. This is what I mean. By seeing her live this harmonious understanding of mercy that begins with being transformed herself and then being revealed to others, we don't have to fall into false dichotomies of I'm not a talker, I'm just I'm a doer, or I'm not really a doer, but I'm kind of a talker. Nobody wants to do that, except for maybe but that they're not to be contrasted to each other. That the world needs witnesses who are teachers and teachers who are witnesses. And that by living that integrated life of mercy, this begins to spill out of the heart. One point just about the fact that Mother Teresa in her body, in her life, gave the entire world a catechesis on suffering that was like none other in the 20th century, in a single person. Father Brian Kolodyichuk, the impossibly last-named editor of her book, Come Be My Light, says, "It was not the suffering she endured that made her a saint." Just bracket. Like it was not her work with the poor that made her a saint. It was not her humanitarian causes that made her a saint. But, he continues, the love with which she lived her life through all the suffering. She knew that everyone can, with God's grace and one's own resoluteness, reach holiness, not in spite of the mystery of suffering that accompanies every human life, but through it. So just to look back about why Mother Teresa is a great woman of mercy, a great saint of mercy for the 21st century. She's a great worker of mercy because she taught that mercy is not a matter of policies or institutions or governments, however helpful those things are when they're at the proper place doing their proper work. Mercy is an act of a person for a person. That's it. From his canonization homily just this last Sunday, Pope Francis says, "There's no alternative to charity. Those who put themselves at the service of others, even when they don't know it, are those who love God. The Christian life, however, is not merely extending a hand in times of need. If it's just this, it can be certainly a lovely expression of human solidarity, which offers immediate benefits, but it's sterile, and it lacks roots. The task which the Lord gives us, on the contrary, is the vocation to charity, in which each of Christ's disciples puts his or her entire life at his service, so to grow each day in love." We are not all called to leave our family and friends and work in the slums of the third world. Some of us are, and it's a beautiful gift to do so, whether it's as a religious, whether it's as a non-governmental organization worker, or what have you, there's very different modes. But we are all called to live the mercy of God in our very bodies, to let Christ reveal himself to me in the distressing disguise of my own poverty first, and then in the distressing disguise of the poverty of others. With this, our task is deceptively easily described. Our task is not to be horrified by the poverty we encounter, not to be turned away from the poverty we see in ourselves and in others. Exactly. So, we don't turn away in disgust. We don't pretend it doesn't exist. We first acknowledge that where we see poverty, this is the fundamental idea, that where we see the poverty of the soul, the poverty of the person, this is a landing pad, as it were, a wellspring, to change the image, where God's mercy belongs, where God's mercy should be welling forth. It's a place that calls out, not for judgment or condemnation or hatred or fear or disgust. It calls out for mercy. Calls out for mercy. So I offer myself to Christ. We ask to receive mercy ourselves first. Not to pretend that we don't have these dark places. Not to pretend that we don't have this poverty. Not to pretend that it is anything other than unattractive. Because it is. Because it is. But to acknowledge in humility that this is what God is giving me right now, to call out for his mercy. Call out for his mercy. That's where it begins. One second. And then in seeing that, in getting used to, in all of its difficulty, receiving that, then trying to ask the Lord for the yet more difficult grace of being able to do the same thing with the poverty that we see in others, whether it's physical or whether it's of the soul, of the morals, of pride, all of the rest. That we receive mercy in our person, from the person of Jesus Christ, and then learn to give mercy to the person of the distressingly disguised other. And we learn to love him.